This episode of The Answer is Yes Baja Sessions is brought to you by Baja Bound Insurance Services. Driving to Mexico? You can buy and print out your Mexican auto insurance policy online in minutes with their easy-to-use website. They also have great travel information to help you plan your trip south of the border. Visit bajabound.com.
Hello, this is Ryan Thomas, and you're listening to the Baja Sessions. Over the last 3 decades, I've lived, worked, and played from the top to the tip of the majestic peninsula of Baja California. And because of this, I've met some incredibly interesting people with equally interesting stories. And today on the Baja Sessions, we're going to chat with one of them. Boy, Jaynes, I'm stoked to have you on the Baja Sessions today. There's so many different directions we can go with our conversation, so I'm excited to see where it goes.
I'm hope we don't go in some of the directions we normally go in, Ryan.
I'll keep us away from those. This is PG-13 show.
Yeah, it's a family show, right?
So, audience, I've got a good friend, Boyd Jaynes, on the show today, and Boyd is kind of like a Renaissance man. He's a race car driver. He's a photographer. It would be really cool to say you're a film photographer and not a digital photographer, because then you'd be like the real Renaissance man. But
well, hold on, I was. It's
yes.
Just there's man for it any longer, but yeah, definitely used to be.
Right. So anyways, we've got a variety of different directions to go with our conversation today, and as I always talk about on this show, it's my opportunity to get to call up old friends and talk about things that we haven't talked about for a long time, or maybe things we've never talked about, and meet new people that typically there's some way connected to the peninsula of Baja California. And I got to say, I think it's safe to say, Boyd, that is probably where we first met, was in Baja.
100%.
Yeah.
I would imagine it would have been on a wide open trip, right?
Yep. I think you're probably right.
Somewhere around 2000 or 2001, something right around there.
Which pushes it close to 20 years.
Holy smokes. I know. When you start to think about it, that's pretty crazy. But that sounds about right, don't you think?
Yeah, it does. So anyways, Boyd and I know each other wonderfully through Baja. And I got to say that the thing that made me think about it was seeing the new Dusty Times coming out and me going, hey, wait a minute, I need one of those. So that was the reason for the text message, and the next thing I thought was, well, wait a minute, why don't I get Boyd on the show? So stoked to have you here.
What you're saying is you leverage the show just to get a copy of Dusty Times,
or vice versa. I don't know. We can go either way. But one thing the place that I'd like to start with you is I've never really I was super surprised 2 or 3 years ago to realize you grew up in San Clemente. I didn't even know that about you. And that you were buddies with our mutual friend Cameron Steele and a few other guys. I did not know you went back that far in that area. But take me back to like in so many ways, dude, you have a dream job. I mean, I know nothing's without its struggles, but you're a professional freelance photographer. Is that a fair statement to make about your profession?
That's 100% correct. I am a professional freelance photographer, and
I know you don't live in squalor. I'm not saying that you're incredibly wealthy, man, but it's not like you're some starving. You figured out how to make a living doing something that I'm assuming you love.
I did, and I'm very fortunate. I count my blessings every single day, I suppose you could say. But it isn't without its struggles. Being a freelance artist, and I say that very loosely, despite the fact that I do primarily commercial work, is never easy. It's extremely difficult, especially this day and age. There's a lot of changes happening within, both content creation, content consumption, and the way art is bought commercially has changed a lot as well. So it's you got to stay on your toes these days and really do keep on analyzing what's going on with the market and what's going on with how we consume images in order to make a living. It's not easy.
Well, and I that's an interesting that could be a real interesting rabbit hole to go down when we talk about how technology is making. I mean, so much of what you used to have to know. I'm assuming this isn't coming from extreme experience, but as a photographer, there was the technical components of it that more and more the fundamentals of why you needed to know the technicals are important, but that a lot of the technical stuff's being done for you these days. Is that a fair statement?
100%. You know, and I wouldn't, you know, I guess you could equate it to a lot of different things.
Well, yeah.
Much like airline pilots, I hear these days can have, you know, the plane will land itself, and they're just there to, you know, to kind of oversee things. You know, back when I first started, we touched on a little bit a few minutes ago about film. Film was a science, you know, exposing a piece of film properly and then taking it somewhere and then having to go through a whole nother process to make the image out of what you've already exposed. It took some knowledge to do that. And nowadays it's a whole lot easier, not just to actually make the physical image, what really isn't anything physical now, it's digital data, but also the business of making images and creating something. It's easier to evaluate how you're doing if you can look at it on a screen immediately, as opposed to before you had to really be confident. And when you shook the hand of your client and said, "Hey, it was a great shoot. I'll have these to you next week," you had to be pretty confident you got the shot.
Yeah, right.
You didn't really know until you know, next day, late in the afternoon or whatever, when you're at the lab, you know, sweaty palms looking at the film as it came out of the machine.
After you've made the commitment, right? After
you've already committed and told, you know, numerous people that, like, yeah, that was awesome, we got it. And there was, like I said, a fair bit of technical knowledge you needed to know. Film wasn't as forgiving as digital. You can be pretty sloppy with digital and get away with it. And for those of you who know anything about go-karting, it's like a sprint kart versus a shifter kart. Sprint kart, you got to be pretty clean because it takes a half of a lap to get the thing back up to speed, whereas a shifter kart, just downshift 2 shifts and you can haul ass again. But it's kind of similar with film in that you can't be sloppy at all, because within, you know, in some cases, a tenth of a stop, it's really unusable. Whereas with digital, you can just be all over the place and make a good exposure.
Which is interesting if you apply that across multiple industries. That thought, it's this phrase came to mind. I'm going to take credit for it if it becomes famous, but the efficiency of prototyping is changing business. If you think about what you're doing, like, I mean, ultimately what you give to the client isn't a prototype, but you can prototype and iterate so easy in today's world, even with tangible physical things. And I think that's definitely changing not just manufacturing, but professions like yours. So it forces you, and I think this is interesting, especially when I call this show, or this show is somewhat about relationships, with the technical side of things becoming more homogenized. It makes the relationship, you got to know your stuff, right? And that's just a given, but it makes the relationship even more important than it's ever been, which is kind of a cool place to be in today's society, where we're recognizing, man, relationships actually matter. They've never stopped mattering, but we're realizing how important they are again, maybe.
No, 100%. I 100% agree with you. And also, really having your business acumen down is super important as well, because it doesn't take much these days for someone to claim to be a professional in many different fields.
Like podcasting?
Yeah, that's right. You know, because, like you said, because of the accessibility of of all kinds of technology these days, you know, we carry so much power just in our pocket. That's certainly true of many, many other types of tools. And you know, if you don't have your business down, it doesn't really make a damn bit of difference whether or not you can make an image or you know, prototype a part on a 3D in your garage. If you can't figure out how to sell that to somebody, or how to maintain a relationship with a business associate, or to, you know, go out and keep work. I mean, there's a whole lot to it, you know?
So to not beat a dead horse, I think we all agree on some of those, the that part of the conversation, but let's get into like some of the cool stuff. I know I've spent time with you in Baja shooting races and whatnot and adventure stuff in Baja, but I know you do a wide variety of type of work. What are some of the coolest, different, unique jobs you've been on that you can actually share with us?
I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of cool stuff, and I'd like to say that I've been really lucky, and I suppose to some extent I have, but it's not for the lack of engineering it myself. I wanted to be in doing the kinds of things that I'm currently doing, and I went after them. So, I've been lucky to do some cool stuff. So, I mean, shooting Dakar is pretty badass. I did a 3-year run where I worked for the biggest team at Dakar, where I shot all of their content, both film and like motion and print. Went to Africa to shoot their test sessions. Was a fully uniformed crew member, and that was neat. I've shot advertising for the United States Navy, where I actually went diving with hard hat divers underneath ships in San Diego Harbor.
No way. I didn't know that.
In training tanks in Florida, and
I didn't even know you were a diver.
That's how I got into photography, to be honest with you.
Really?
I was doing underwater photography when I was like 14. I was scuba diving before I could carry the tank by myself.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's how I started shooting. I was shooting underwater photography, and the first time I developed film was underwater film that I had shot at a summer camp in Catalina Island. So yeah, that's how I started getting interested in photography.
Do you still scuba dive?
Yeah. Very infrequently. It's a big commitment to have a hobby like that in so many ways. Despite the fact that I live, 15 minutes from where I could jump in the water and do that in Laguna Beach, but it's probably somewhat a cop out to say that. It's a lot of work though.
Yeah.
I won't.
No, and it's not. I would.
No bones about it. It's a lot of work, and these days with our busy lives, and the other thing is too is I'm not in that community anymore. I tell you who I used to dive with is Greg Stefano.
Oh, no way.
Him and I used to dive a lot together when we were kids. So there you go. Speaking of San Clemente.
Yeah, Greg's a buddy of ours another dream job, man. skipper on a fishing yacht in Cabo.
You and I can interview Greg.
Right, I know, huh? Well, so you mentioned Africa. You mentioned you've done fashion stuff too, though, haven't you?
I've done a little bit of it. Nothing to really of note, to be honest with you. When I was in college, I for a short period thought I was going to maybe go into fashion. I had a fashion photography class with a very famous photographer named Paul Jasmine, who I believe still teaches at Art Center, which is where I went to school in Pasadena. And I kind of didn't really enjoy it. It was a required class. And I turned in pictures of my buddies riding motorcycles on the sand dunes in Rosarito for a fashion story. And lo and behold, that day when I turned that stuff in, there were some editors and some agents and stuff who came in to help out to critique real people in the industry. And they fell over themselves looking at my stuff. And I thought I was turning it in as a big fuck you. And it turned out that they loved it. And the next thing you know, now they're trying to groom me to be the next fashion photographer. And I ended up just hating it. I hated all the people. They're all ugly people. Despite everybody being beautiful in the fashion industry, deep down inside, there's so much ugliness in that industry that I didn't want to do it.
Just tell me what you really think. Jeez.
Right?
Right on. That's funny. I for some reason I envisioned you fitting, and don't take that as an insult, but fitting into that culture pretty well, because you seem to have an eye for fashion. In fact, I modeled a bit in college too. Why doesn't that surprise me?
Well, because number one, I wanted to learn. The guy who was shooting this stuff was really good photographer. I wanted to learn what he knew.
Yeah.
So I volunteered to work on his shoots. I ended up modeling, and also because it involved semi-nude women.
So, why doesn't that surprise me?
So I was like, yeah, I'm down. Totally. You want to braid my hair? I'm totally cool. But so I think I've been really fortunate. I've done some cool stuff. I'm trying to think of.
Have you been a freelancer your entire life, or did you, other than your stint at Dirt Sports, have you always been self-employed?
I've always been freelance, even during that period. I was freelance. When I was out first